Ever found yourself in a spot where you just feel completely, profoundly stuck in life? Maybe it's this one habit you absolutely cannot break, or a cycle of bad decisions you just keep repeating, or honestly, just this heavy sense of being tied down to a certain way of living. So why does that happen? Well, Vedic philosophy asks us to look at a really fascinating analogy. It compares this feeling of being stuck to a repeatedly twisted rope. And if you think about it, a rope isn't just one solid chunk of material, right? It's made up of all these individual, tiny threads that have been meticulously wound together. Today, we're going to explore exactly how this ancient philosophical framework maps out the incredibly complex psychology of our modern lives. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to decode something truly foundational together. We're looking at how just three simple psychological threads weave together to create the literal infinite complexity of human behavior. The source material we're diving into today comes from the teachings of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and it offers this brilliant structural breakdown of why we do what we do, and more importantly, why we so often feel completely bound by our own nature.
All right, let's start with the basics, the three gunas.
So, to understand this rope, we first have to understand the threads. Think about a single, microscopic thread. It's incredibly weak. You could snap it with your pinky finger. But when you take a bunch of those flimsy threads and twist them together, their structural integrity fundamentally changes. They become tough. Twist those strands together again, and boom, you've got a thick rope that's practically impossible to break with your bare hands. This is exactly how material nature acts on our consciousness. So what are these threads, actually? The text identifies them as the three gunas. We have sattva, which is all about goodness and clarity. Then there's rajas, representing passion and relentless drive. And finally, tamas, which is ignorance and inertia. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that these three qualities are the raw materials of literally all conditioned existence. Every mood, every phase, every mindset you experience, it's all built from these three fundamental building blocks. They're like the primary colors of human psychology.
And now, let's look at how this expanding complexity actually plays out.
The thing is, these gunas, they never just sit there in isolation. You don't wake up one Tuesday experiencing 100% pure goodness or 100% pure ignorance. It just doesn't work like that. They are constantly mixing and intertwining, twisting over and under each other, just like that rope. Picture a real-world psychological profile. Let's say someone's mind is currently operating at 50% sattva, so clarity and goodness are taking the lead. But notice that passion, or rajas, at 25%, and ignorance, tamas, also at 25%, are still right there, intricately woven in. This proves all three modes are operating at the exact same time. Even when you're feeling super clear-headed and totally at peace, those underlying drives of passion and inertia are hovering in the background, subtly shaping your day.
But let's flip that and contrast it with a passion-dominated profile. Say someone is operating with 60% rajas. They are highly driven, super active, maybe a bit stressed out, or, overly ambitious. Here, sattva and tamas get pushed down to 20% each. This brilliantly illustrates how the endlessly shifting proportions of these gunas completely dictate how a person behaves in any given moment. Every single conditioned living being is governed by all three modes all the time. It's just that the recipe is constantly changing.
So you might be wondering, why do they change? Well, these internal percentages aren't just a roll of the dice. They're highly reactive. They continually strengthen, weaken, and recombine based on exactly how we go about our daily lives. The text highlights 5 of these continuous recombination drivers. First, association, literally who you hang out with. Next, desires, what you secretly or openly crave. Then, activities, what you're physically doing with your time. Karma, the inevitable reactions to your past actions. And lastly, consciousness, your overall level of awareness. Every single conversation you have, every tiny action you take, actively shifts these percentages inside you.
And that brings us to a very specific, fascinating number mentioned in the texts, 81. Swami Prabhupada mathematically explains this initial mixing and recombination using this exact number. Think of it like this. You take the 3 base modes, they interact with each other, and you get 9. Then, as those 9 interact with the overarching modes again across different states of being, it multiplies out to 81 initial combinations. It's really just a way to wrap our heads around how rapidly 3 basic little threads explode into this massive array of psychological states.
Actually, let me clarify something. 81 is not a hard mathematical ceiling. It's more of an illustration of expanding complexity. It's a profound metaphor for the sheer variety and deeply twisting nature of our material conditioning. In reality, these combinations expand way beyond 81 into just innumerable, highly customized states of consciousness.
The math simply helps us grasp the staggering scale of all these permutations.
So, what happens when we scale this up? Let's look at the macro tapestry. If this rope analogy works for the microscopic inner workings of your brain, it absolutely applies to the macroscopic reality of the universe. Prepare yourself for this number from Vedic literature, 8.4 million. The texts describe 8.4 million distinct forms of life. And this just perfectly illustrates the ultimate scale of the Gunas. Every single species, from a tiny microbe to a blue whale to the most complex human being, along with all their unique quirks and psychologies, is a direct, literal manifestation of these countless guna recombinations. All the diversity in the biological world is just sattva, rajas, and tamas twisted together in millions of different, totally unique recipes.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the knot, the cycle of karma.
How does this twisted rope actively bind us in real time? Like, how does one simple action turn into a chain? The text maps out the exact continuous feedback loop that tightens this knot, and we're going to walk through it step by step. Step 1. Actions performed under the influence of these gunas create habits, and those habits burn deep mental impressions into us, known as samskaras. Step 2. Give it enough time, and these impressions crystallize into fixed tendencies. It basically becomes your default operating system. Step 3. These tendencies begin to actually shape your identity and your attachments. You catch yourself saying, well, this is just who I am. And finally, step 4, that attachment leads directly to further karma, more action, and ultimately the cycle of rebirth. It is a flawless, completely self-sustaining loop. And this brings us to what is probably the most crucial realization of this entire explainer. Bondage is not static. Look, if you're tied to a chair with a regular rope, the rope just sits there, it doesn't do anything. But this psychological rope is entirely different. Unless a person actively works to rise above the gunas through spiritual realization, the rope doesn't just hold them, it actively tightens. The more you interact with these material modes, the thicker and heavier the layers of your conditioning become.
Let's bring this all together under the concept of the ultimate entanglement.
When we zoom out and really look at these threads, the endless combinations, and that tightening cycle of karma, we're looking at a formidable, multi-layered network of conditioning. To validate just how insanely powerful this rope is, the source text shares an authoritative quote from the Bhagavad Gita. It describes material nature as durateya, which translates to very difficult to overcome. And the text makes a point to emphasize that this difficulty isn't about some external physical brick wall blocking your path. The difficulty lies entirely in these deeply woven, endless internal interactions among the gunas. It is so hard to break free because the chains are literally made out of our own habits and desires.
And that leads us to our big, central insight for today. We are not merely bound by material nature. We become increasingly entangled through our repeated contact with the gunas. Every single day, through the people we associate with, the desires we feed, and the actions we take, we are doing one of two things. We are either loosening a knot, or we are twisting those threads of sattva, rajas, and tamas even tighter. Understanding this structure is the absolutely essential first step to unwinding that rope. So I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on today. Take a hard look at your current habits. Look at the desires driving your actions right now. Which threads of the rope are you actively twisting tighter today?